Hi. So let's talk about the verbal section of the GMAT. As you are aware, there are basically three areas to it. You have reading comprehension, you have critical reasoning, and you have sentence correction. They all check various parts of your understanding of language, English language. Now, let me begin one by one and take a brief area to talk about at this point of time. Starting with reading comprehension, what it checks is your understanding of somebody else's perspective. Okay, when somebody else writes something, how well do you read into it? Okay, if you look at the scope or the extent of questions that might be asked, more or less, you can be asked about the main idea, you can be asked supporting ideas, you can have inferences, then that can be logically inferred from the passage, you can have the application to some other, some other situation. These kind of questions can come. You don't really need any special skills for it. Having said that, practice is extremely important. Okay, now there are two kinds of people. One is somebody who's extremely good in the reading department, somebody who loves reading, somebody who's an avid reader. For them, because they've been used to reading so much, who loves to read, their understanding or the perspective of the this particular section is so much more intense. But let's go with the understanding that you are an average reader, somebody who doesn't read much, can read a little bit whenever the situation arises. Now, if you're one of those, what becomes important is to pick up the nuances or the tricks in which you can apply your time the best. See, you have about 8 minutes to answer the questions, okay? So the maximum time that you can have is about 2 minutes to read the passage. Now, if you were a good reader, 2 minutes would have been sufficient. Now, within these 2 minutes, what is it that you are required to do if you're an average reader? The first thing as a teacher that I always stress on is that you should be able to understand the theme and the tone of the passage. The theme basically encompasses the idea expressed in totality, and the tone is how the author feels about the subject. If you watched a 3-hour long movie or a 2-hour long movie, and I asked you, what was the movie all about? You're not going to explain me every single scene, are you? You're going to give me the gist of the movie, okay? What is it that the movie wanted to, or the movie spoke of, the movie showed, right? Then the same thing is with the passage, okay? Now, the way to go about it is reading enough to get these things clear inside your head, yet you don't have the time to stop and read everything. So that is where the practice or the techniques come into play. Okay. Now, what are we looking at? What are the things that we want from the passage, that we have to understand from the passage? If you look at the scope of the passage, what is the extent that the passage is dealing with, what it starts with, what it ends with, the tone can be descriptive, it can be analytical, it can be opinionated. You need to know the organization of each paragraph, and you need the purpose, why it was written. Okay. Now, my suggestion here is for somebody who's practicing this. We're talking of somebody who's just practicing this. What you do is you pay a lot of attention to the first paragraph or the first 10 lines of the passage. It introduces whatever the author is trying to talk of. Get a very clear idea. So just for example, let's say it's a science passage. Okay. Since I'm on this subject, you can have a passage from various areas. You can have physical and biological sciences, you can have humanities, you can have social sciences, you can have business related passages. Okay. So let's take, for example, that you have a science passage over here, and this one is talking about a new experiment that has proven some older thesis wrong. That's the passage all about. The first paragraph will introduce you that, right? And you can more or less understand that the rest of the paragraph will possibly talk about how that experiment came into being and what was the experiment all about, what it entailed, how it proved the thesis wrong. Okay. So once you have read the first paragraph and you know that this is what you're going to be getting, you can only skim through the rest of the paragraphs. Don't get into the details of understanding each and everything. Now, another issue that tends to come with the backdrops is the jargons. Okay? All fields have their own jargon, specialized words. That tends to feel scary for people who are not used to reading it. So for example, somebody suddenly says, the NPAs are pretty bad this year. Now, if you are not somebody who knows what NPAs are, which are non-performing assets for a bank, it can sound like, oh my God, what are we talking about, right? So jargons are nothing but specialized words. Once you start reading and practicing, you will learn to, you don't actually have to know the exact meaning of it. As long as you can make out what it can mean in a context, you are sorted. You don't need anything more than that. So that confidence comes as long as more and more exposure to these passages becomes for you, and you're more exposed to these passages, right? So there might be some issue with that. So each paragraph might contain that. So learn to skip over the jargons or not to be feel, you shouldn't feel intimidated by it. Just go over them. And each paragraph, okay, this paragraph, it starts like this, so this is dealing with this. The next paragraph deals with this. The third paragraph deals with this. And then again, pay a lot of attention to the conclusion. What conclusion ultimately is the author drawing? This gives you the scope. This gives you the theme of the passage. And obviously, the words tell you how the author feels about the subject. Okay. Generally, if you have this much thing inside your head clear, the theme and the tone, you will see that the rest of the the options are easier to eliminate, and you more or less, even though you are not 100% sure what the answer can be, by elimination, you arrive at the right answer. Go with any answer that aligns with the theme of the passage. Anything that is beyond the theme, does not say go with the theme, or does not go with the tone of the passage, is never going to be answered. Anything that is too strongly worded, okay, is generally never your answer. So these are certain benchmarks that you can keep in mind when you're answering the questions. So let me just take a passage and just talk about it in a more practical format. So maybe that will be easier for you to understand. Now here you can see in this passage, very quickly, what we do is we try and read the first paragraph and see what is the topic that is introduced over here. It's introducing, yes, that's a young enterprise services, which is a credit program, and it's created to encourage entrepreneurship in 14 to 18-year-old who shows clear aptitude for starting business ventures. And you can see that when it started and what it does, you can see that. Now, within this paragraph, what you can see is the future of yes is now in jeopardy. So here, a negative intonation comes in that the author says that this program was started with this mindset, but now it seems to be in trouble. Okay, a number of damaging criticism have been leveled at the program, and the members of the congressional agencies that provides the funding have suggested that yes, maybe scale down or even dismantle entirely. That's how bad the situation seems at this point of time. Now, each paragraph, now, if you see the way it starts, is one complaint is that. So it's starting with a complaint. What is the complaint? That disproportionately distributes the funds that ES distributes have disproportionately gone to young people from economically disadvantaged families. And then if you skim through it, you can see that they've got lawsuits claiming that the requests for funding were rejected because the families relatively high levels of income. So it went to people who were from low income families, although there might have been people who came from not so disadvantaged backdrop, but were equally talented. So there seems to be some kind of discrimination, and the resulting publicity was an embarrassment. So we can see that this is another, this is how the first paragraph deals with. Next one also starts the same way. Another challenge has been admittedly difficult task of ensuring that a young person and not his or her family is truly the driving force behind the venture. So generally you see the first line of each paragraph tells you what to expect in the paragraph. So you can just skim through that, okay, something of this sort would be said regarding how it has been used by other people apart from the young person who's supposed to receive the funding. And to look at the ending to make matters worse, the story of the return monies were at first denied by a yes spokesperson and had to be retracted. So again, you can see that the negative has been outlined over here. Now, the next paragraph that you see, the last one starts, in truth, yet has had some real success stories. So you see a change in the tone. While we started off with the negativity of what has happened with yes, Now the author talks about the success stories over here. It goes on to talk about, very quickly, if we skim through, 14-year-old girl in Texas used the knowledge and funding she received to do certain, obviously some good things must have happened. So you can skim through the rest. You don't have to read what she did. Two brothers in Alaska have developed. So this is an example of what this have done. However, yes has been pitifully lax in trumpeting these encouraging stories. So this line again becomes important for us. Yeah. What it's trying to say is that while it has had some very good success stories, it could not make it known to the public, or it could not, advertise it in a manner where people would get to hear that more, and rather than the negative things that we have read so far. This is shame, but one that can be remedied. The administrators of YES should heed the advice given in one of the program's own publications. No business venture, whatever is appealed, will succeed for long without an active approach to public relations. So now we see what this passage is focused. It talks about the program. Yes, this is obviously from a business field, typically education, a part of it. It talks about the fact that yes is a potentially a very good program, but it has been, there's been a lot of negative press because of certain factors which has been explained in the first two paragraphs. But the author basically feels that, it's a great program and it can be bettered if you just had better public relations. If you manage to speak about its successes, to advertise it to people, and then people would get to see the other side too as well. Right now, it's a negative side that is getting more projected. So this is basically the scope of the passage. This is what the passage entails. If this is clear inside your head, now when you look at the questions that are given to you, let's take a few up. Let's say this is one question that's given to you. The example below illustrates the importance of, which of the following would be the most appropriate title for this passage? So title generally deals with the theme or the basic essence. It should be able to give you an idea as to what the passage is talking of. Recent difficulties in the YES program, you know that is not the entire thing that the author has spoken of. He has or she has rounded it off by talking about the how you can manage it better. It can be remedied. That's the line that is given. So it's too one-sided. You can't take it. Federal Entrepreneurship Program for Young Adults. That's just a very, very broad outline. It does not capture the issues or the things that can be done better. Nothing of that sort. It's very broad, so you reject it. Successes of the YES program, no, because the author has spoken of the negatives that have been associated with it as well. So again, that's too one-sided. Common challenges facing the federal programs. It is not about just any federal programs. It is about the YES program specifically. So again, that is not what we are dealing with. He says the YES program, how to overcome recent challenges. This we can take, and this is my answer, because we are talking of the YES program. We are talking of the challenges, and we are talking about how to overcome them. So you see, once the scope is clear inside your head, it is easy to eliminate options and then choose one that sits with the basic purpose of the passage. Okay, that is how you need to, go through the passage. Practice on this. Let's look at another question. Let's take this one. Okay. The author of the passage would most likely describe YES as a. Okay. Now, quickly read the options. What you should always do is take away ones that can never be your answer. Okay, which is absolutely not your answer. So when I read it, failed enterprise that is beyond repair, that is never going to be my answer. I can also see waste of public resources that should never have received funding. A and E are very, very extreme and extremely negatively worded. I reject them completely. Now I have to choose between B, C, and D. B says noble effort that has been hampered by external factors, which is obviously little ambiguous. It is not external factors. It is external factors has not affected it. It is the mismanaged, or it's the fact that you could not advertise the positive parts of it well, the positive success story, the success stories well that the author says should have been done. C says limited success that can be improved to greater fiscal response. This was never about fiscal responsibility. That does not go with the theme of the passage at all. Fiscal responsibility was not a part of this. So Your answer is D over here. Potentially worthy program that has been mismanaged. Mismanaged because the public relations part has not been handled well. The author feels that if you handle it well, this could be this is a really good program to have, right? So this is D. Let's look at another question. This is a detailed question. Detailed question, what happens is, when we are practicing, one tip that I generally tend to give students is that this obviously when it's a very starting point of your practice is if you're not somebody who's a good reader and you have problem retention of facts, retaining details inside your head, what you can always do is after each paragraph in one line, you can write down what is it that you've read in the paragraph. What do you think the paragraph is dealing with? Each paragraph you can write it down. It helps you retain details better. With practice, with about in after you have done, let's say 7 days, 10 days of this thing, you will see that you have started retaining facts more and more. So this helps you in the detail-oriented question, something that would come from within the passage, a detail that has been given. Because this question, if you see, all of the following are discussed in the passage except if you retained what each of the paragraphs spoke of, more or less, you could still do it without having to go back to the passage at all. Okay. The resignation, we have read it within the first paragraph, you remember. The bad press resulting from financial improprieties, we again read it in the paragraph which was talking about the funds not being used by the entrepreneur but somebody else. So we have read about that. Lawsuits, yes, the parents had brought lawsuits against the YES program because they were denied the funds since they came from not so disadvantaged background. So that we have read. Stated goals in the first paragraph itself, the stated goals were given. Current levels of YES funding. This is not something that we have read in the passage at all. Whatever the current levels of YES funding are, because the author ends it with how it can be better or what remedies he's offering a remedy to which can save this program or which can really make this program work better, right? So these are some things that you can do when you are practicing for your reading comprehension. Remember, it always takes practice. It is never about 1 day or 2 days of doing it. These are things that tends to come with practice only, and the more we practice, the better we get at it. Okay. Let's move on to the next section that I would like to take up. The next one I would take up is sentence correction. I am taking up specifically modifiers. I have to open the page. Okay. Now, I'll talk about modifiers. Okay, so what are modifiers? Modifiers are words and phrases that add complexity to a sentence. Okay, let me first begin by giving you a very simple example of it so that we know what we're talking of. Let's say I have a sentence. Look at this sentence in front of you. Piled up next to the washer, I began doing the laundry. Now, while intellectually you might understand what the sentence is trying to say, technically it's a wrong sentence. Why? because the phrase piled up next to the washer is before the subject I, and you were definitely not piled up next to the washer. So a modifier error happens, can happen something in this manner wherein it modifies the wrong uh, part of the sentence. So the right way of correcting this would be, I began doing the laundry piled up next to the washer, right? The laundry was piled up next to the washer. You were not piled up next to the washer. So generally it adds complexity, okay? And if it's placed wrongly, it would technically make the sentence completely wrong. So that is what modifiers tend to do. If you look at this sentence in front of you, originally Charles City County, Virginia natives, United States Presidents William Henry Harrison and John Tyler share a unique place in American history. Harrison was the first president to die while in office, and Tyler was the first vice president promoted to succeed a deceased predecessor. Now, the part we are only bothered with the part that is underlined. Now, sentence correction. If I give just a very 1 or 2 line brief understanding of it, it checks your knowledge of correct grammar. Okay, how correct you are in spotting the right way of writing a sentence, grammatically correct construction. That is what it checks. Okay, so basic knowledge of grammar is necessary over here. Again, that you have to know too many rules by itself is not necessary. If you are somebody who is extremely good at the language itself, you speak the language well, you read it a lot. So more or less, every time you hear a wrong sentence, your ears tell you something is not correct. So you can make that out. If that's not the case, and in some cases you do have to know the technicalities of it, right? For example, let's say tenses. You need to know how the perfect tenses have to be used, or exactly where the perfect tenses come into play. Okay, for example, in modifiers, if you're not aware that this kind of mistakes can happen, you might not get exactly what is happening over here. For example, this sentence is actually pretty easy because there's a trick to this particular sentence. If you see originally Charles City County, Virginia natives, now what would that even mean? Because if you are a native, you would originally belong to it. So you need not have both the words. There's no point in having original and native, because native would mean the other one itself. If it struck you, you would not have to spend too much time in finding out what your answer is going to be. You simply reject all the options that has both the words. So you see, I think A has it, B has it. Then you have C has it, originally natives, and E has it. So your answer is going to be D. You didn't have to solve anything at all. Otherwise, then you had to solve each and everything to find out, okay, exactly what is going wrong over here. So these are the tricks that happens once you keep doing the questions and, practicing it out. Let's take another one. This one, published since 1851, the founders of the New York Times were Henry Jarvis, Harvest Raymond, and George Jones, who had no previous journalism experience. The entire sentence is now underlined, and we have to find out what's wrong with the sentence. So you see, published since 1851, the founders were definitely not published since 1851, right? So you need to change that sense. So you reject everything that has got this particular combination, wherein this phrase, what is this phrase supposed to modify? What would have been published? It has to be the New York Times, right? So you need that particular combination. So A is out because it says published since, again, the same thing. It's the same sentence. B is out because, again, Henry Jarvis, Raymond, and George Jones were not published since 1851. Then you have the New York Times. This has no previous, and Henry Jarvis. This one sounds okay. Key is again too complicated because and published since 1851. What are we talking of? Been is always a wrong sense to use over here. There's no active verb over here. So C is my answer over here. Published since 1851, the New York Times was founded by George Jones, who had no previous journalism experience, and Henry Harvis Raymond. This has the preciseness of it. This has the correctness that we are using over here of the sentence construction and where the modifier has to be used. So sentence correction basically can be about redundancy. That means you're using too many words that are not necessary, that we did in the earlier one, wherein originally a native, that was about redundancy. This one is about modifiers, wherein we are talking about, it's modifying the wrong place because the founders were not being published since 1851. You have to place it in the right context. This is what the grammatical part entails. Okay. And now I will take up a little bit of critical reasoning. Now, critical reasoning for me mostly talks about common sense. Okay? It's basically common sense. I have seen that the better you are at critical reasoning, the better you get even in your reading comprehension, because it's a very connected thing. Okay, your inference abilities, the way you are interpreting the words, interpreting the sentences, becomes something that really is very helpful in the reading comprehension section as well. Okay, now critical reasoning, if you see, deals with it's about 100 odd words paragraph that is given to you, and it measures your ability to make arguments, evaluate arguments, or even formulate or evaluate a plan of action. Okay, what if something of this sort was to be done? You have questions like strengthening the argument, weakening the argument, finding out the main theme of the paragraph. You can even have that. The main argument that the author is making. If the main thing about a critical reasoning question is understanding the conclusion. If you get the conclusion clear inside your head, more or less everything else can be done. Conclusion is generally we think that it would come at the end of the paragraph, not necessarily so. It can come at the starting, it can come in between. Generally it is at the end, but you should not go with that blind faith in it. You can have words like as a result. So you see, you can have these kind of words that can lead to conclusion. Okay. Now, I will try and give you a simple sentence to talk about. Let's say, last night I had a headache and so I took an aspirin. I still have a headache and therefore aspirin is a useless medicine. So if you have to look at the conclusion of this two-line statement, we can see that I am drawing the conclusion that aspirin is a useless medicine. Now, if I outrightly went and told somebody, you know what, aspirin is a useless medicine, and somebody would say, why would you even say that? And why would I believe you? So what I did was I gave you something to base it on. What am I basing it on? I'm basing on the fact that I had a headache and I took an aspirin because of it, but I still have it. So that is why I'm concluding that aspirin is a useless medicine. So I'm basing it on a premise. This premise is leading to the conclusion. Now, the three things that are there within this is you have a premise, you have a conclusion, and you have the assumption. Assumption is something that bridges the conclusion and the premise. As long as these three things are clear inside your head, solving a critical reasoning question is not a problem. It just takes a little bit of practice. Okay. As I said, it is mostly about common sense. Only thing that you need to know is what is the scope of the argument? What is the argument that the author is giving to you? As long as you are clear on that, you will see that with a little bit of practice, you can easily eliminate the option. Okay. Always try and find out what is the conclusion drawn. Conclusion immediately tells you the premise on which it is based. And then between these two would come the assumption. So if it is a question on assumption, you know that it has to come between your premise and the conclusion. So you look for an option that would do that. Any other option that goes beyond it, that is beyond the premise or beyond the conclusion, you know it's not going to be an answer at all. Right? Let's look at your question. So I'm taking the same question with two different modification to it, or two different parts to it. Now, this is a question: to improve the town's overcrowded school system, the town council has proposed an ambitious education plan to reduce classroom size and make capital improvements. A plan they intend to pay for with an increase in property taxes for homes valued over $500,000. Although the school system desperately needs improving, the town council's plan should be defeated because the majority of the people who would end up paying for the improvements receive no benefit from them. The conclusion is that whatever this plan that has been drawn would not really succeed because the people who would pay, that means the people who own houses that are more than 500,000 in value, would not receive any benefit from them at all. This is the conclusion that is drawn. Always take everything that has been given to you to be 100% correct. Okay, don't question that the information that is given to you. Now, the question that is given to you over here is, which of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument above? So what is my argument? Argument is it is not really going to be successful because people who would be paying more will not receive any benefit from them. So I need something that would support this particular conclusion, right? Now, the A says the town school system is currently ranked. It has got nothing to do with my conclusion, so I reject it. The other towns nearby that have made similar capital improvement do not find. Again, this has got what other towns have got or not got, has got nothing to do with this town's conclusion that I'm drawing over here. So that is not my answer as well. C says the town will need to spend additional money on architect's plan for the capital improvement. Again, nothing got to do with your argument at all. So you've got between D and E. E says some homeowners will delay home improvement projects in order to keep the value of their homes below 5. Again, even if that is the case, there might be some people who might escape the tax. But that does not mean that this is not strengthening the argument that the plan would fail because these taxpayers receive no direct benefit from it. D says an examination of the tax rolls shows that most homeowners in this category no longer have school-age children. So obviously, if I am the one who owns a 500,000 plus, home, and I'm the one who's paying the tax for it, and I don't really have kids who are going to go to the school, what incentive am I getting for paying the tax? Right? So this is strengthening the argument. See, the thing is, as long as you understand what the argument is and you can take away what does not go with the basic conclusion that has been drawn, these are actually easy questions to solve. These are not challenging at all. The only trick is you need to understand the argument very well. What is the author arguing? On a similar note, which of the following, if true, provides the town council with strongest counter to the objection that its plan is unfair? So what are we saying? In the main question, we are saying that the person who is paying for it receives no benefit from it. So how would the town council counter it? By showing that there is some benefit. So I need to find an option that would show the benefit. This is what I'm doing, right? So A says even with the proposed increased property taxes in the town are well below, nothing to do with my argument. So A is out. Paying for the school system improvement using existing town funds will result in shortfalls. Again, nothing to do with, because I am looking at the counter to say that people who are paying for it will receive some benefit out of it. Only then can I counter it, right? So B does nothing to it. C is about teachers. Again, nothing to do with my argument. So again, between D and E, one is your answer. E says a feasibility study has shown that the cost of the improvements will likely be 20%. Again, this is actually, I think, going against it rather than showing that there is some benefit to the taxpayers as well. D says smaller class sizes and capital improvements in the school system tend to increase property values in the surrounding community. This is countering it, saying that if you did pay the tax and the money went into doing these kind of things, it would result in an increase in the property value. There is some incentive for these homeowners to pay for it. So it is not really, it's defeating the question or defeating the argument that they will get no tangible benefit from it. So this is how a critical reasoning question is solved. It is actually simple once you have understood what the question argument is. So the trick is to understand the argument. I hope this was beneficial. Thank you.